In order to fill the void regarding some real news that should be coming out of West Ham United, we're getting inundated with the potential departures of three key players at West Ham, and the stories are pretty much relentless. Depending on which ITK, which newspaper, which social media column you want to read it first, Matthias Fernandes either prefers Tottenham on a Monday, Man United on a Tuesday, and could be tempted by PSG, Liverpool, or Real Madrid by the end of the week. And of course, Crescencio Summerville adds at least £5 million to his value every time he scores a goal in the World Cup, prompting Man United to try and beat PSG for his signature, whilst leaving the likes of Roma and God knows how many other Italian clubs who were interested in him reeling as they are being priced out of the chase for the Dutch international. And then in the last couple of days, Everton and David Moyes were 100% interested in Jared Bowen, and so interested that they were prepared to pay £20 million for him. The audacity. But it's okay, because we're bound to get more than double that with Aston Villa now throwing, their hat into the ring, showing interest in Bowen, who can, I guess, offer him Champions League football. Now, if a club comes in with a serious money bid for him, a player who's going to be 30 years old at the end of this calendar year, do we sit up and listen? I did say that Bowen has already decided that he's going to be staying at West Ham United, despite all the noise that's going on. But I also qualified that anything can happen in this transfer window, which can pique the interest of West Ham, who might believe that actually letting Bowen go for 40, 45, 50 million pounds is an offer that they just simply can't turn down. But the message is clear. If Bowen stays, it says a lot about the ambition of this football club in wanting to keep its best players for the promotion push this coming season. Look, the truth of the matter is really, I'm really trying to pay as little attention to the transfer stories and the transfer noise around West Ham, because it kind of seems rather pointless to add fuel to the transfer window fire until we actually hear what's exactly going on at the club behind the scenes. Now, I started the week by saying that I'm expecting big news to happen this week. But we're kind of halfway through the week now, and nothing has yet been revealed. I said in the previous video that a number of key issues absolutely need to be addressed. Look, when we hear about the arrival of one key individual, a director of football, whether that be Steve Nixon or another, then we move on. When we hear about the confirmation of what's happened with the share issues, as in the confirmation of Daniel Kretinsky indeed upping his stake from 27% to 43%, we feel that something's beginning to happen. And when we don't actually have a clear guidance on how we're going to manage our debt, which will in turn demonstrate how we're going to keep our players, then I guess, we feel a bit of anxiety. Now, with all this stuff being revealed, we're left in a kind of limbo. So are we as a fan base quite rightly starting to get a little bit nervous? Because if I'm being completely honest, a couple of weeks ago, the mood around West Ham felt really different. David Sullivan stepped aside. We already knew about Brady long gone. Daniel Kretinsky telling everyone that he's now effectively in the driving seat. Big promises are being made. A new structure is talked about. I've mentioned a new DOF is coming in. Nuno was confirmed to continue being manager for next season. And key players were directly told that they will not be sold. And suddenly, for the first time in a very long time, there's genuine optimism around the football club. But here we are. The transfer window has opened. It's been open for a week. The championship fixtures are due to be announced on Thursday. Pre-season is only just around the corner. Players who are not involved in the World Cup are due back for pre-season training within the next couple of weeks. And yet publicly, it all feels pretty quiet. No director of football, no signings, no major announcements, no obvious activity, and naturally supporters are asking the questions. What exactly is going on? And should we actually be worried? Look, if you're new to this channel, it's the first time you're watching the channel, or if you've watched the channel before but yet to subscribe, a QR code has appeared in that top corner there. Please click on that. It takes you straight to the subscription page. It costs nothing to become a subscriber. If you enjoy the content, why not click on that, subscribe, hit the bell notification to let you know when the next show is on. Right, let's crack on. In a time where I kind of genuinely feel this is one of the most interesting periods we've had as supporters at West Ham, we just want to know that things are really in control. And amongst all this, I think there's one person maybe we've kind of overlooked, or certainly I have, and that person is Nuno himself. I doubt very much Nuno is sitting around twiddling his thumbs. He undoubtedly would be involved in the conversations and planning for the season ahead. And I think we've kind of seen evidence of that without maybe giving him the credit for it. Let's talk about these reported emails that went to the players and their agents. Several stories have emerged suggesting certain players have been told, we don't intend to sell you, you're part of next season, you're important to us. Now, if that's true, those decisions don't happen by accident. You don't just have somebody in the boardroom sending emails because they fancy doing it. These discussions would have involved Nuno. Because if you're telling Jarrod Bowen, Matthias Fernandes, Kretinsky, Summerville that they're all staying, then the manager's got to be in part of that decision to send those emails. And suddenly you start to realize that perhaps more work is being done than we actually see. Take another example, Callum Wilson. Now, I mentioned several weeks ago that I'd heard that there was a desire to keep Wilson at the club. They want to retain him. At that time, people weren't convinced, and they said, of course, he's going to Coventry, where he's from. Did he start his career there? Well, certainly where he's from. Or, other clubs that have just been promoted are going to go for Callum Wilson. And look, nothing's happened of yet. Many fans were convinced that the Wilson deal was going to be a short-term option. But I guess at that time, we didn't think we're going to be relegated. But anyway, then the reports emerged this week that an offer is still on the table for Wilson to consider. Well, that kind of tells you something. It tells you that decisions are being made. It tells you that the manager finally sees some value in him, despite all the issues that they went through last season. And it tells you that people at the football club are actually working towards a squad plan. Now, we don't see what goes on behind the scenes. We don't hear about the meetings, the budget discussions, and so on. And we certainly don't see conversations between Kretinsky, his entourage on the board, and Nuno. And yet those conversations are almost certainly happening. Let's talk about Kretinsky for a minute, because one thing that keeps also being overlooked is this. He didn't effectively take control of the football club simply to continue doing exactly what has happened before. If he wanted that, there'd be no reason for any of this change. There was no reason for all the public statements that he's made, no reason to talk about restructuring a DOF, appointing Nuno. There is clearly a reset at West Ham. The danger is that supporters hear these big promises and expect these signings to happen overnight. Football doesn't work that way, as we all know, particularly when you're kind of trying to change the whole environment, the entire structure of how this football club has been run in the past. The DOF appointment alone is kind of fascinating, because if we wanted a quick appointment, we would have got one by now. The fact of the matter is that we're trying to get the right appointments. And that is really, really, really crucial, because look at the mistakes that we've made in the past under Sullivan. And that in itself tells us something. It doesn't feel like there may be panic amongst the fans, but it doesn't feel like there's panic at the club. It feels more like there's proper planning going on. Now, of course, I understand why supporters are feeling anxious, but perhaps we're looking for reassurances, maybe in the wrong places, because maybe the biggest reassurance is this. The core of the squad have been told that they're staying. The manager is in place. The owner, or let me rephrase, the majority shareholder now is engaged. the restructuring continues, and the planning seems to be happening kind of behind the scenes. In fact, if you really think about it, the last thing we would want is panic. The last thing we want are players being signed before Nuno has a say. Or the last thing we want is the DOF arriving only to find that half the transfer business has already been completed. Perhaps doing things properly simply feels strange because we're not used to it. Now, does that mean everything is perfect? Absolutely not. I'd still like to see the DOF announced, ideally this week. I'd still like to see clarification on recruitment, ideally this week. I'd still like to see movement in the transfer market in time. And I suspect most supporters will agree. But I don't think silence necessarily means inactivity. So there maybe the question isn't who's running the football club. Maybe the question is, how much of the work is simply happening behind closed doors? And perhaps that's what we're seeing right now, or not seeing, as the case may be. No chaos, no confusion, no leaks to the ITKs of this world, just a football club quietly putting foundations in place before the visible pieces start to arrive. Now, when I talk about the ITKs, all these stories about transfers, if you read how they're written, you realize one key thing. You know, the agents have spoken to the clubs wanting to buy. The clubs have spoken to the agents who want to sell their players. None of it is West Ham United are in negotiations with. West Ham United have confirmed this, that, or the other, because as we all know, there's no one there at the moment to make these decisions. And maybe that plays in our favour. Maybe that plays in our favour in the sense of, whilst there's no one there, no business can be done. So in a roundabout sort of way, Kretinsky telling key players that they're going to stay kind of works that way. Because when you haven't got anyone to deal with, when you haven't got the selling club to deal with, there's no sell. Look, of course, the next few weeks are going to be huge. But sitting here today, I don't think there's enough evidence to suggest that nothing is happening. If anything, I think the evidence points towards exactly the opposite. Nuno is working, Kretinsky is involved, recruitment discussions are taking place, and somewhere behind the scenes, decisions are being made. The only difference is that we haven't been invited to the room, because had we had all the ITKs, we'd have known yesterday what's going to happen tomorrow, wouldn't we? You know, that's the way it worked. But now it's a very different environment. We're not involved. Us, the ITKs, are speculating, and of course they're going to speculate, but we're not involved. And that's the big difference, I think, this summer over the previous summers. We don't really know, you know, because we're not invited to that table. We're not invited to the discussions, conversations that are going on between the likes of Kretinsky and Nuno and the recruitment staff at the club. But as West Ham supporters, perhaps that's the hardest part, because we can't see what's happening. We naturally assume because of that nothing's happening at all. Different world, isn't it? Let me know what you think. Are you concerned? Are you confident? Do you think the club are quietly going about their business? Or do you believe supporters should be seeing more activity by now? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's not forget, by the way, more activity by now. We've got the whole of July and the whole of August in the transfer window. 2 whole months, plus the rest of this week, the rest of this month as well. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Leave your views. If you've enjoyed the video, like I said, hit the like button, become a subscriber, hit the bell notification, and there's a hype button. If you click on that, then this promotes the video on YouTube for others to watch. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Have I kind of eased your concerns? Let me know.